Captain Jace Wilder stood alone on the observation deck of his ship, staring out into the endless blackness of space. The distant stars twinkled like tiny jewels scattered across a dark blanket. But to Jace, they offered no comfort. He had spent years fighting in this vast galaxy, facing battles, dealing with loss, and constantly moving from one mission to the next. Today, however, something felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. His crew had been assigned a simple mission: investigate an old, forgotten alien outpost on the edge of Coalition space. The outpost had been abandoned for centuries, its origins shrouded in mystery. Jace wasn't expecting much, just a few ruined buildings, some old tech to analyze, and a report to send back to the Coalition. But as always, the universe had a way of surprising him. When they landed on the planet, the air was thick with dust. A dry wind blew across the barren landscape, carrying the scent of ancient decay. The ruins of the outpost stood before them, half buried under sand and rock. It looked like a place lost to time, untouched by the hands of those who had once built it. But as Jace and his team stepped out of their ship and approached the entrance, something caught his eye. A faint movement. At first he thought it was just the wind or a trick of the light. But then it happened again. A shadow, slipping between the broken walls of the outpost. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. He signaled to his team, and they moved forward cautiously, weapons raised and ready for anything. The shadow grew clearer as they neared. It was a figure, a person, or at least it seemed like one. But something was different. The shape was too tall, too slender, its movements too fluid. When they reached the entrance, Jace motioned for the others to stop and stepped forward, alone. There, in the ruins, was a young woman. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her long hair shimmered like strands of silver. Her eyes, wide and full of fear, locked on to his as he approached. She was dressed in simple clothing, torn and worn. But there was a strength about her, a presence that Jace couldn't ignore. She stood still, watching him warily, as if she were unsure whether he was a threat or a savior. Her body language spoke volumes. She was a captive, bound by forces beyond her control. Her shoulders were slumped, and her gaze flickered toward the ground, as though she didn't know what to do or where to go. Jace's heart went out to her. She looked like she had been living in this desolate place for far too long. Her existence was a mystery, and yet he felt an overwhelming need to protect her. He didn't know why, but there was something in the way she looked at him. Something that told him her story was one of pain, loss, and survival. Are you okay? Jace asked softly, his voice calm and steady, trying not to startle her. The woman didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, as though she couldn't believe he was real. And slowly she took a step back, her bare feet kicking up dust as she moved. There was a tremble in her hand, as if she were afraid to reach out. Jace took another step forward, keeping his distance, not wanting to push her. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she here, alone, in the ruins of a long-forgotten outpost? "Don't be afraid," he said, trying again. "I'm not here to hurt you." At that, she lifted her head slightly, her violet eyes searching his face. Then, to his surprise, she spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she hadn't used it in a long time. "Are
you here to take me away?" Her words were shaky, and she paused between them, as if afraid of the answer. Jace's heart sank.
It became clear to him then that she had been in this situation before. She had been taken, forced to obey. And now she expected the same. She expected nothing but captivity. He couldn't let that happen. Not again. "No," Jace replied firmly. "I'm not here to take you anywhere." But the woman didn't seem to believe him. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and she took another cautious step backward. Jace noticed the subtle chain marks on her wrists, faint scars that spoke of years spent in some form of restraint. Whoever she was, She had been held captive for a long time. Before he could say anything else, one of his team members stepped forward, breaking the moment. "Captain, we need to keep moving. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Jace gave a quick nod, but his gaze never left the woman. She seemed to shrink back at the sound of the other voice, her body tense as if expecting violence. Jace took a deep breath, making a decision. "Stay here," he said to his team, his voice steady but firm. "I'll take care of this." He turned back to the woman, who was now watching him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He couldn't imagine the kind of life she had lived to be so wary of someone who was trying to help. But in that moment, Jace knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her slip through his fingers. "Listen to me," Jace said, crouching down to her level so he wasn't towering over her. "I don't know who did this to you, but I swear to you, you're not alone anymore. I'm going to take you with me to a place where you can be safe." "No one's going to hurt you! Not anymore!" For a long moment, the woman said nothing. She simply stared at him, the weight of her experiences clear in her eyes. Jace could see that she didn't trust him. Not yet. She had been hurt too many times before to believe that anyone would truly be kind. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something else. There was a flicker of hope there, buried deep within. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe again. "I promise," Jace said softly. "You're free now." And with that he stood and extended his hand to her. She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out. For a moment, it seemed like she might pull away. But then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but to Jace, it meant everything. The days following their strange encounter in the ruins of the alien outpost passed in a blur. Jace did not know what had compelled him to act the way he did. To offer the strange woman his hand, to promise her safety. Perhaps it was the look in her eyes, the haunted way she stood, the weight of so much pain held behind her violet gaze. But he couldn't deny the urge to protect her, to ensure she never faced such suffering again. Her name, she told him, was Lyra. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She said it quietly, almost shyly, as though speaking her own name was a luxury she wasn't used to. The moment she spoke it, Jace felt a strange sense of responsibility well up inside him, one that he knew he would never be able to shake. Lyra was not just a prisoner. She was a person, someone with a story, and Jace was determined to hear it. When they boarded the ship, she had not said a word for the longest time. The other crew members watched her carefully, unsure of how to interact with the mysterious alien. They knew nothing about her, except that she was different, strange. But Jace had made it clear to them that she was under his protection, and they would respect that. Lyra sat alone in the common area for most of the day, staring out of the large windows at the endless expanse of space. Jace could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she flinched when someone walked too close. Her movements were cautious, calculated, like a person who had spent years walking on eggshells. At first, Jace gave her space, allowing her time to adjust to her new environment. He understood how overwhelming it could be to go from a life of captivity to one of freedom. He had seen it before. People who had been trapped for so long they didn't know how to live any other way. But after a few days he could no longer ignore the silence that hung between them. He was a man of action, always solving problems head-on. But this situation felt different. Lyra wasn't like anyone he had met before. She wasn't just a person to rescue or a mission to complete. She was someone who had been through things that he couldn't even begin to understand. And she had a right to tell her story when she was ready. So, one afternoon, Jace sat down beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just quietly watching the stars pass by as the ship drifted through space. It was a comfortable silence. He didn't rush her, didn't demand answers. Eventually, Lyra spoke, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes still fixed on the stars outside the window. Jace looked at her, surprised that she was willing to speak. He had expected her to remain quiet, to hold everything inside, but here she was, reaching out with her words.
"We're heading to a coalition base," Jace replied calmly.
"We need to report back on the mission, but after that, we'll figure out where you want to go."
"You'll be free to choose." Lyra looked at him then, her violet eyes narrowing as though she was processing his words, trying to understand their meaning. Free to choose. For the longest time, she had not had that option. She had been a prisoner, a pawn in someone else's game. The idea that she could choose where to go, what to do, was both terrifying and exciting. She had never allowed herself to dream of such things. "I don't know what to choose," Lyra said, her voice barely audible. Jace didn't respond immediately. He understood. After years of being forced to do things, of living under the thumb of others, making a decision for herself was not something Lyra was accustomed to. It was like she had forgotten that she had the right to decide for herself.
"You don't have to choose right away," Jace said gently.
"I'll be here. You're not alone anymore." The sincerity in his voice caught Lyra off guard. She looked up at him again, really looked at him for the first time. Jace didn't seem like the others she had known. He wasn't cruel or distant, but warm and understanding. She hadn't trusted anyone in so long that the idea of trusting him felt foreign. But in his presence, she didn't feel afraid, not like she had with the others. "I didn't think I'd ever be free," she admitted, her eyes downcast as she spoke. "I never thought anyone would come for me." Jace felt a pang of sorrow in his chest. He had heard stories of planets where beings were enslaved, their lives ruled by others. But seeing it firsthand, hearing it from Lyra's own mouth, made it all the more real. She had lived a life of unimaginable pain, of constant fear. No one had ever offered her freedom before. "I'm here now," Jace said softly. "And I'll make sure no one takes that freedom from you." For the first time since he had met her, Lyra smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected. As the days passed, Jace continued to spend time with Lyra, learning more about her and letting her learn about him. She told him bits and pieces of her story, how she had been born on a distant planet, a place ravaged by war, and how she had been taken from her home at a young age. She had been forced to serve in various roles, from labor to combat, until she had ended up on that forgotten outpost, lost and abandoned by those who had used her. Jace listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He could see the weight of the years in her eyes, the way she carried her past with her like a burden she couldn't shake. But he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, a spark of resilience. Lyra was stronger than she realized. As for Jace, he began to open up more as well. He shared his own story, the struggles he had faced, the sacrifices he had made for the greater good. Lyra listened, surprised by the depth of his words. He was no different than her. He had his own pain, his own burdens. But unlike her, he had found a way to keep moving forward, to keep fighting for what he believed in. One night, as they sat together in the ship's common area, Jace could see the change in her. She wasn't as tense as before. She wasn't afraid to make eye contact, and although she still had moments of hesitation, she was beginning to trust him, piece by piece. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Lyra," Jace said one evening, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "You're not alone." She looked at him then, her gaze softening. "I don't know if I can ever stop being afraid," she replied quietly. "It's been a part of me for so long." "Fear doesn't just disappear overnight, but it doesn't control you. Not anymore." Lyra didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't sure if she could ever fully trust again, if she could ever be free of the scars that her past had left. But for the first time, she felt like she could try. She could try to live without fear, without being haunted by the memories of her captivity. Over the following days, their bond grew. It wasn't just the physical closeness that connected them, but the emotional intimacy that was slowly building between them. They shared their hopes, their dreams, and their fears, and with each passing day, Lyra found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in years, something she never thought she would experience again. She was starting to feel human again. The days aboard the ship turned into weeks. As they traveled further into space, Jace and Lyra found themselves relying on each other in ways neither of them had expected. Lyra had become more than just someone he was protecting. She had become a companion, someone whose presence was as natural to him as the stars outside their ship. And for Lyra, the more time she spent with Jace, the more she began to understand the meaning of freedom, even if she still wasn't entirely sure what it would look like for her. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day. It was in the small moments, when Jace showed her how to read the stars outside the ship, or when he patiently taught her the ways of the ship's technology, or when they shared a quiet meal, sitting side by side, learning more about each other. These simple gestures built a foundation that neither of them had realized they needed, but both of them had desperately wanted. At first, Lyra had been unsure of her place on the ship. She had spent so many years in the shadows, her only purpose to serve and obey, that being treated with respect and kindness felt like a strange and foreign concept. But with Jace, she had started to feel something new, something more than just safety. She felt like a person again, with her own thoughts, her own desires, her own choices. Yet, even with all of these changes, there was still a barrier between them. Lyra knew that she could never truly escape her past. The memories of her time as a slave were like chains wrapped around her heart, heavy and suffocating. She had been forced into servitude for so long that she didn't know if she could ever truly be free of the guilt, the shame, or the fear that had been instilled in her. It was hard for her to believe that anyone would see her as anything other than a broken, lost soul. Jace, however, was determined to help her see the truth. She was not broken. She was strong, capable, and deserving of love, respect, and freedom. He never pushed her to talk about her past, but he always made it clear that she could share whatever she wanted with him, whenever she was ready. He didn't need to know every detail of her past to understand that she had been through unimaginable things. All he needed to know was that she was here, and she was more than just her history. One evening, as they sat together in the common room of the ship, Lyra couldn't help but notice the way Jace looked at her. It wasn't the way someone might look at a soldier or a teammate. It was different. There was something deeper in his eyes, something that made her heart beat faster. It was a look she hadn't seen in years, not since the time before her life had been taken from her, and it made her feel nervous. "You're staring," Lyra said quietly, her voice tinged with a nervous laugh. Jace blinked and quickly looked away, a slight flush spreading across his cheeks. "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "No," Lyra said quickly. "It's just—" "No one has looked at me like that before." Jace's gaze returned to hers, and this time, he didn't look away. "How do I look at you?" Lyra hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Like I'm someone worth looking at." "You are, Lyra. You're worth so much more than you think." There it was again. The warmth in his voice, the genuine care he showed her. It was more than just kindness. It was something deeper, something that made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. "I don't understand," Lyra whispered, her heart racing. "Why are you so kind to me?" After everything, Jace reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. It was a simple gesture, but it made her feel like she was being anchored, grounded. "Because I see you, Lyra. I see who you are, not just who you were." Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to appear weak. But the truth was, she felt weaker than she had ever had. She had spent so many years guarding herself, locking away every piece of her heart, that now, as Jace's words began to reach her, she didn't know how to deal with the flood of emotions that came with them. She didn't know how to handle the fact that someone was seeing her for who she truly was. And that scared her. "I'm not like the others," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not like the people you know."
"I've done things. Terrible things." Jace's hand tightened around hers, but not in a way that felt controlling.
It was reassuring, comforting. like he was telling her that she didn't have to carry that burden alone anymore. You're not your past, Lyra. We all have things we regret, but they don't define us. You've come so far already.
You're free now!
She shook her head, her chest tightening with the weight of everything she had been through. But how can I be free when I feel like I'm still trapped in it all? Every time I close my eyes, I see it. I hear their voices. I can't escape. Jace took a deep breath and sat back in his chair, still holding her hand. You're not alone anymore. You've got me, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll face it together. But it starts with you, Lyra. You have to let go. You have to believe that you're worthy of something better. Lyra stared at him, unsure of how to respond. His words were like a lifeline, but she didn't know if she was ready to reach for it. She didn't know if she could let go of the past, let go of the fear, and step into a future where she wasn't defined by everything that had been done to her. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. Jace's thumb gently brushed over her hand, his touch so soft it almost felt like a promise. You don't have to know all the answers right now, but you're not alone anymore, Lyra.
I'm here, and I'll always be here.
The weight of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. For the first time, Lyra felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the same kind of peace she had known before, the kind that came from being passive, obedient. This peace was different. It was the kind that came from knowing that no matter what happened, she wasn't going to face it alone. Later that night, as the ship drifted through the silent void of space, Lyra found herself sitting next to Jace once again. They were both staring out at the stars, the same view they had shared countless times before. But this time, something had changed. This time, Lyra didn't feel like a prisoner in her own mind. She felt like she could breathe again, like she could finally begin to let go of the chains that had held her for so long. Without thinking, she leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. She wasn't just finding freedom from her past. She was finding something new, something she had never dared to hope for, something she wasn't sure she deserved. But Jace was there, and that made all the difference. The journey to the Coalition base was almost complete. Lyra had grown used to life aboard the ship, and though she still had moments of uncertainty, she had come to find comfort in the routine. She no longer stayed in the shadows, hesitant to speak or move. Instead, she actively participated in the daily activities of the crew. Jace had introduced her to the controls of the ship, explaining things patiently, and she found herself growing more and more fascinated with the way everything worked. She was beginning to feel like a person again, like she wasn't just a relic of some past life, a burden that needed to be fixed. But despite the comfort she found in her new life, there were still moments of doubt. Every time she passed the ship's observation window, gazing out into the endless blackness of space, the weight of her past came rushing back. She still couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong, that somehow she wasn't worthy of the kindness Jace had shown her. She knew he cared for her, but she wasn't sure how deep that care went. Could he truly see her as something more than just someone to protect? Did he see her as a person worth loving? Jace had made it clear from the start that he was there for her, that he would never abandon her. But Lyra couldn't help but wonder if that was simply his sense of duty as a captain. Was he protecting her because it was the right thing to do? Or was there something more to it? She had been wrestling with these questions for days, and every time she thought she might have an answer, doubt crept in. Maybe she wasn't meant to have a life like the others. Maybe she wasn't meant to have happiness or love. But on the day they arrived at the Coalition base, everything changed. As the ship docked, the crew quickly set to work, preparing for the debriefing and the reports they needed to send back. But for Lyra, this was more than just a routine stop. It was a crossroads, a place where she would have to decide what came next. The base was a place of safety, a place where she could be free, but it was also a place where she could disappear into the system, forgotten once again. She wasn't sure she was ready for that. She had already made so much progress, learned so much about herself. But the thought of staying on the base, becoming just another face in the crowd, filled her with a sense of dread. She didn't want to go back to that life. She didn't want to lose the only thing that had truly mattered in her life since she'd been freed, Jace. It was that night, after the day's work was done and the crew had retired to their quarters, that Lyra found herself standing at the edge of the observation deck again, staring out into the stars. She was lost in thought when she felt a familiar presence beside her. Jace had come to join her, standing silently at her side, as they both watched the endless void. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was something different about it tonight. It wasn't the easy, quiet companionship they had shared over the past few weeks. This silence was heavier, filled with unspoken questions and emotions neither of them had dared to express. Finally, Jace spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" Lyra didn't turn to look at him. She knew he had read her so easily. There was no use pretending. "I don't know if I can stay here, Jace. Not in a place like this. It's too much like the life I had before. I can't be lost again. I won't go back to being invisible." Jace's hand reached out, and she felt his fingers brush lightly against hers. The touch was soft, but it was enough to send a warmth through her body. "You're not invisible to me, Lyra," Jace said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you. I've always seen you, and I'm not going to let you go." The words hit her like a wave, washing over her and pushing away the doubts she had been holding on to for so long. She turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his face. He wasn't just saying this out of duty. He meant it. You mean that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You're not just saying it because it's what I want to hear."
Jace shook his head. "No, I mean it, Lyra. I'm not going to let you disappear. Not after everything you've been through. You're not just someone I rescued, not someone I have to protect.
You're someone I want to be with. Someone I care about more than anything."
Lyra felt her heart race as his words sank in. She had spent so long being afraid to hope, to believe, that she could have something more than just survival. But here was Jace, standing in front of her, offering her something she had never imagined possible. She was overwhelmed by the emotions stirring inside her, by the sudden clarity that had arrived with Jace's words. She had been so afraid, so caught up in her past, that she had never allowed herself to believe in something better, something real. "I don't know if I can believe it," Lyra said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can believe that I deserve this. I've never had anyone who cared for me like this." Jace's hand cupped her cheek gently, tilting her head so that their eyes met. "You don't have to believe it all at once. Just know that I'm here, and I want you to stay with me. You don't have to be alone anymore." His words were soft, but they carried the weight of a promise that Lyra could feel deep in her soul. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself absorb the truth of what he was saying. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to carry the weight of her past by herself. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Lyra whispered, her hand reaching up to touch his. "I've never felt like this before. I've never had someone who really saw me, who really wanted to be with me." Jace smiled, his thumb gently brushing her skin. "Then let me show you. Let me show you what it's like to be loved, to be cared for. Let me show you what it's like to belong." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief, of hope, of something she had never thought possible. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love. "I want to stay with you, Jace," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Jace's smile widened, and in that moment he stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her in a tight embrace. "Then, stay. Stay with me. Let's face the future together." Lyra didn't need any more words. She felt it in the way he held her, the way he cared for her, She had found something she never thought she would. A partner, a companion, someone who truly saw her for who she was, not as a slave or a prisoner, but as someone worthy of love. As the stars continued to drift by outside the window, Lyra realized that for the first time in her life, she was truly free, not just in body, but in heart. And with that, she knew there was no turning back. The past might have shaped her, but it would not define her. She was ready to step into the future, one where she could be loved, cherished, and free. And as she looked up at Jace, she realized that he was the one who would help her write that future together.